Hello again and welcome back to Tiva Talk. Yet another guest out and about in the community. I'll just give her the opportunity just to introduce herself and tell us a bit more about where she comes from and kind of like define who she is really.
Hi everyone, so I'm Ncube and I am originally from Zimbabwe. I came to the UK in 2001, so I've been here for a long time. In Zimbabwe, I come from Mount Darwin. That's where my people are from. So for those that know Zimbabwe, you know we are we've got totems. So I come from Nare Ananaro Nendoro.
Nare
Unendoro.
Nendoro. Okay.
Yeah, Anachuhoro. So
Hey.
that's who I am as a person. I'm the firstborn of three. I've got two siblings, a brother and a sister.
Okay.
And I'm a mother of two, a son and a daughter. And I'm married to Mr. Ncube.
You married the other part of the
I married the other
of the
part
world, eh?
of the world, yeah. So a girl from Mashonaland, and I'm married in Matebeleland. So again, that defines me as well as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of kind of my upbringing in Zimbabwe, I was brought up by two beautiful parents, both teachers, who again have supported me and defined who I am as a person as well. Before coming and migrating to the UK when I was 19.
Okay. No, welcome, Mavrin. Thank you for giving me this opportunity so that me and you can sit and have a conversation. If only you knew when I started, this channel, one of the people that my wife was excited about me getting to interview was yourself.
Wow.
It was a long time coming, but I needed to make certain kind of like preparations before I get to the big guys. But anyway, thank you for this opportunity. So you if we could just take me back to when you were growing up in Zim, what kind of childhood would you say has kind of like defined who you have become today?
So as I mentioned earlier, both my parents were teachers, so I grew up in a very secure and loving family. Okay. And both my parents were, devout Christians. So being raised in Zimbabwe, I've got a very strong Christian background and a religious background. I also grew up in the Salvation Army. Okay. Where I feel also that shaped who I am as a person. And I would say, yourself in Zimbabwe and Africa, there are opportunities that you get and opportunities that you don't. I do believe strongly that my parents always sought best opportunities for all of us as children, and starting from the schools that we went to. I remember very much, leaving my parents, going to boarding school, very well knowing that I'd kind of taken everything out of their coffers because boarding school wasn't cheap.
Expensive, yeah.
It was very expensive, and I knew that they always wanted the best for us, so they would stay without anything. They would
make a
sacrifice
yeah.
for us to go to boarding school. So all those things, I do believe that has shaped me. So education has always been a key element in my family. My dad used to always say, education is the key to success. Oh, wow. And really wanted us to all be quite educated and pursue the different careers that we had chosen for ourselves and the different career paths.
Okay.
So I would say I had a very happy childhood, really surrounded by support, and cheerleading. My parents were my biggest cheerleaders.
Oh wow! So that positive input into who you became.
Yeah.
All right. So obviously you mentioned the aspect of education being very important. Both your parents were educators back home.
Yes, they were.
Okay.
Both of them were educators, yeah.
All right, okay. And obviously, mom, now being a doctor, which is, I think, where you'll be heading to next.
Hopefully. I do believe that I have the capacity to do it. But sometimes it's the willpower, isn't it?
Yeah,
when
true.
you think about it. But yeah, both my parents were educators. Obviously my father's now late, but my mother is still a very strong educator. Even where she is continually educating people, and you will know yourself that when my father died, we decided to honor my dad's name by opening the school in Hatfield. And again, going back to what I said earlier on, that just shows, the importance of education and what they wanted us to do. That his legacy is still continuing even now, and my mum continues to hold that kind of role in our lives, even my children's lives, in terms of us, making us pursue, education as a
path.
As a path. Yeah.
All right. So taking you back to Zim, obviously the way it's looked at as in being a girl child, did you feel that kind of like inequality between the girls and the boys when it came to education?
Yeah, I guess it's across the board, isn't it? In terms of Africa, the girl child is always kind of left behind because you're assumed to only be good for the kitchen, and often education, even things that you are allowed to do are limited. But it goes back to my upbringing. Both my parents are educators, so the fact that they were both educators, they were very conscientized in terms of what they wanted. So I didn't feel the impact of being a girl child, being raised in my family, in my household. But that said, I would feel the impact elsewhere, where the expectation was that I was a girl. But in my household, there wasn't a girl or a boy. And a classic example is me growing up, being taught to do everything that a boy could do, and similarly for my brother, being taught what a girl could do. So I can change tires, I can fix electricity, I can tile a house, things like that, because the environment I grew up just made sense that, we were all taught skills for life, not skills that were based on our gender or our gender orientation. I was taught just to be a basic human being and do the things that I needed to do.
Wow. No, that's very insightful. Thank you very much. So in terms of, I just want to continue just to dwell in Zimbabwe, and obviously this builds up your belief system, and obviously that has kind of like translated to what you have come into, the transition, through that transition coming into the UK. That's been quite pivotal in what you've done and where you are now.
Yeah.
So in terms of education, you went to boarding school. What kind of environment is that?
Well, for those that have gone to boarding school in Zimbabwe, it's a tough environment. I would say it's a dog-eat-dog world, basically. You have to learn to fend for yourself, learn to be quite independent from a very young age. So I went to boarding school at the age of 12, in a school of maybe about 400 children. And in boarding school, you go to boarding school months on end, and you'd only go to home during half terms or breaks and stuff like that. So I strongly believe that also shaped, in terms of resilience and, my ability to cope from a young age, being left in that kind of environment where you kind of have to learn to be independent and learn to be resilient and learn to be confident and strong in an environment where you haven't been raised with those people. You're meeting people for the first time from different backgrounds, different belief systems, everything is different. And you're spending months on end with people that you weren't raised with.
You really don't know.
You don't know. So I think for me, going to boarding school has also shaped who I am as a person. The fact that I can cope with in any different environments and with many different people is because I think I learned that from a very young age, that people are different, versatile in their own way.
Oh, no, that's good. Thank you. So in terms of the transition now, when you come to the UK, When did that take place?
So I finished my GCSEs and tried to do a bit of work in Zim, A levels, and that didn't work out. I went to secretarial school, and at the time, my mum, obviously, she was a teacher, and she was coming to England for her masters.
Okay.
And I started doing a bit of research about, United Kingdom, the education system, and she came in the October, and while she was here, I started to research. She came in the September. Sorry. While she was here, I was doing a bit of research about what I could do. So I began to apply for universities here and colleges here, and I got a place at Wigan and Leigh University, Wigan and Leigh, down south somewhere,
All right.
to study accounting. So in the October, I followed my mum to the UK for education.
Okay.
And then while I was here, we then decided actually we were better together. So I stayed in Sunderland with her. She was at Sunderland University. And I stayed in Sunderland with her, just obviously for company's sake, but also find something locally. So that's how I ended up staying in the place that I've stayed in for many years.
All right. Okay.
And to answer your question about the transition, I struggle with the transition because one set of belief systems coming to a different set of belief systems, one cultural differences to another, living what I'd known all my life at that time, which was 19, being 19, that's all my life at that point.
Yeah, true.
So living in Zimbabwe and coming to a foreign land with no friends, just a 19-year-old, coming to a world where I didn't know what to expect.
Okay.
So I think the transition, I would say the first couple of years were quite difficult.
Quite difficult.
Yeah.
Quite difficult. Yeah, you mentioned something there about the research that you're doing about different educational systems. What would you say, obviously having done your basic education in Zim, what are the differences between the two educational systems that you find, even when it comes to your own children now? What do you think is the main difference between those two type of educational systems?
I think there's a very massive difference in terms of ability, your ability to achieve. Zimbabwe, I strongly believe that you have to be the elite of the elite or the most intelligent for you to penetrate some of the systems, including universities, because there aren't many. So you find that the gap between those that are being educated becomes wider for those that maybe don't have that level of educational attainment.
Okay.
So what I mean by that, if you don't get 15 points, 20 points, 30 points at A level, that's you're done. You have to find other routes into other things. Whereas in the UK, I believe that it's for mixed abilities. There isn't anybody can go to university. You are given the opportunity to go to university, and because there are many, you can choose different courses that anybody can do. Whereas in Zimbabwe, even some courses you can't go without many points.
Yeah, no, it's very true, because I wouldn't have seen the light of day in Zim in terms of going to university, because I wasn't the cream of the cream.
Exactly. Yeah.
So while we're talking about that, you said you tried many other things. Obviously, you did your A levels, then you did a bit of secretarial studies.
Yeah.
So obviously, that was a path on trying to find yourself,
yes,
or find what you were actually good at.
Mm-hmm.
So where we are now, would you say you've actually hit the nail on the head in terms of like knowing your purpose and knowing, what skill set you have and which career path obviously you've taken, or you still would like to pursue? So have you discovered yourself, basically?
I would like to think so. So growing up, I always knew that I wanted a job where I would help people. That was a very strong conviction in me. Okay. I knew I wanted to help. So when it came to choosing careers, when I was younger particularly, I tried many different things to just find who I was, but I was always drawn to the helping profession. So when I came to the UK, I think, again, I'm big on research, so I started doing a lot of research around what courses were helpful, how what career would I do that would help somebody. So through that research, I then stumbled upon social work.
Okay.
And I went to do my undergraduate. My first undergraduate was in social work. Because I knew, the conviction in me about helping was there from a very young age. So when I went into the profession, I knew I wanted to make a difference in somebody else's life. So when I did the undergrad in social work, I feel then I found my passion, because the career itself lends itself very well in the helping profession. You're helping people maneuver, certain practices and policies of social care, everything.
Okay.
So I found myself then when I did the undergraduate in social work, but then also through doing that work, I realized that I wanted to do even more deeper stuff in terms of helping people, because I felt as a social worker, yes, I was helping people, but I wasn't getting to the root cause sometimes of the problem. So while I had finished my undergraduate in social work, I worked first as an advocate in a charity, working with people with lacked capacity to make their own decision. Then I moved on to substance misuse services, and then at that point I realized actually I wanted to find out what made people reach for substances. What was it that made them feel like crave the substance? And it got me in, and again, my art of research, I started researching about, what can I do that gets to the person?
To the person, okay.
So I then stumbled upon the cognitive behavioral therapy about, understanding how we think and how that can influence our mood and behavior in a negative way. So then when I was a substance misuse social worker, I then transitioned and changed course totally from being a social worker back into therapy and working with the person. So again, in the helping profession. So that's how I landed in my role as a cognitive behavioral therapist.
All right. Oh, that's quite interesting. Just to let's just linger on around that area of the aspect of career, choosing a career, and having, obviously you felt the inclination to be around the within the helping field. How would you then help somebody who is trying to kind of like search for what they could possibly do? Obviously your steps could have been possibly different, but you've been in the field and you have done a bit of research. How then would you help somebody to kind of like find their purpose?
I guess it goes back to who you are as a person, isn't it? We all intrinsically know who we are as people. You know what you like, you know what you don't like, you know what you enjoy, you know what you don't enjoy. So I think the journey to finding a career is laying it there and starting to think, who am I as a person? Really, go deep inside you and find out, actually, what do I like? Who am I? What are the things that make me tick? What are the things that annoy me? So I think when choosing a career, it's really as important as, going back to the basics. If I did this 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, would I enjoy it?
Yeah.
And often the answers lay in those questions that you ask yourself.
I think 99.9% of us would say no.
Exactly. And it's then finding what is it that you can do from 9 to 5 that makes you feel happy, and at the end of the day you have that sense of, I've achieved what I've set out to do. And for me, that's where career choice lays in. I couldn't see myself do numbers because I find them boring. I couldn't see myself being in a hospital touching blood because I hate blood. So all of the things that I was researching was, who am I?
Okay.
And I could have gone into the helping profession of physical health where I could take bloods, but I couldn't see myself do that. So I think helping somebody, a young person. I mentor people.
Okay.
I mentor young women, and I mentor, even as a therapist, I do mentor. My job is,
Yeah.
And I always ask the question, if you were to wave a magic wand, who would you be?
All right.
And it goes back down to the basics of asking yourself, sitting with yourself, having those difficult and uncomfortable questions that you ask yourself, and the truth lies in there.
No, thank you. Just tell us a little bit about, you mentioned mentoring. What's that about?
So I'm a strong believer in the fact that unless you get somebody that has walked the path, sometimes it can always it can be difficult to maneuver and to navigate, and particularly for us Black and ethnic minority members of the community, especially living in the diaspora and living abroad.
Yeah.
It can be very difficult to navigate. Who do you talk to? Who knows what? You're coming to a foreign land, and So my mentorship, I mentor young people, and
all right,
just to get them into the careers that they want to, or it's not even about career. It's about
you as an individual.
You as an individual, because sometimes the way you think of yourself and what you think about yourself can significantly influence what you become and who you become. If you see yourself in a negative way and you utter those negative things, chances are you will
be negative and
you will struggle.
Yeah.
So going back to the point I was saying earlier on, in order to find who you are, you need to go back to those basics and understand who are you as a person. What are the things that you say to yourself, and what are the things that you do to yourself that influence who you are as a person?
Mm-hmm.
So the mentorship program is around sometimes helping somebody to recognize the way you think about yourself is probably the influence that's stopping you from achieving what you want to achieve. Because if you're negative, and you'll, I always say, if you find yourself criticizing yourself and being quite negative all the time, you're likely to see that whenever you go into places. And
I totally agree with you, because I grew up in an environment where I won't say it was a nurturing environment, but because I wasn't totally academic, I sort of struggled, and trying to identify, even asking myself questions like, why am I here? Because when it came to football, I was rubbish. When it came to different sport, and I saw people excel in those different fields, but for me it was, so I became a less confident individual. And obviously, with time, then you get to have that light bulb moment where you say, oh, hang on, I'm actually good at this.
Yeah.
Then, positive behavior kind of comes in at that point. Oh, no, it's quite interesting. It's quite interesting. So in terms of the mentorship program, is it open to anyone, or is it something that you're doing at the...
Well, sometimes I get approached by people, can you be my mentor? Sometimes, a friendship strikes, and that's how it starts. And people be like, oh, can you mentor me, or can you support me in this career path? And I have been known to do that in the past, where I've supported quite a few women in power, particularly women. I don't know why the inclination with women, but I think it goes back to that idea of being a girl child and becoming, being raised in Africa, where opportunities are not always in front of us. So I'm always inclined to help girls more, because I think we often get a raw deal. But that said, I also help boys where they have approached me.
But also remember, a funny thing comes to mind. I've spoken to you several times about crazy ideas, and you've always been, if you remember, you've always been welcoming and very supportive and positive input into what somebody has to say or what somebody is thinking about.
Yeah, because I think it goes back to that idea of, I would have wanted to be the adult in my life that I didn't have. I'll explain what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Growing up, you have a lot of people that will speak ill of you. and I think you've articulated that.
That is very
They will have a perception of you, of what you're going to become, based on their limited view of the world and themselves. So I grew up in an environment, including teachers going, oh, you never amount to anything.
Yeah.
Neighbors going, oh, you never amount to anything. And often those beliefs stuck with me, where I used to think, oh, I'll never amount to anything because so-and-so said this. So whenever somebody comes with an idea, I'm one person who listens to what that person is saying and then offer my 2 pence when I can. Because I think sometimes having that somebody give you that positive, reinforcement is the difference between them pursuing their career that's going to make them who they become, or actually you break that person down to the point that they don't move on anywhere. You become that voice that's negative, that keeps ringing in their head, that stops them from achieving what they want to achieve. So I think, again, it goes back to, my upbringing and where I've come from. And the most interesting thing is, in my family, and my parents and everybody around that surrounds me, I have that positive reinforcement. They've been my biggest cheerleaders. The world has crushed me sometimes and told me I can't be anything, I can't be good enough at stuff. But I've gone home and they've said, no, actually, you can do anything that you put your mind to. So I've had those kind of views growing up. And I've chosen to focus on the ones that are more positive. Although sometimes those negative views still come in my head. When I am being promoted, when I'm getting big jobs and I'm thinking, ooh, why did they choose me? That self-doubt often comes in.
Okay. So how then do you deal with those kind of things? The negative chatter that comes to mind, or people kind of like saying, oh, you cannot do that. How do you overcome those challenges? Yeah,
that's a very valid question and very good question as well. I think the career path that I chose to become a cognitive behavioral therapist has really, really been instrumental in my own life. And changing how I see myself and how I view myself as a person. I'll say this, it doesn't mean that I don't have the negative thoughts. I still have them. I still doubt myself. I still have imposter syndrome sometimes.
Yeah, that's a term that a friend of mine always uses.
Yeah, I still have that. It comes in now and again, but a lot of the time I ask myself, who is saying those words? Because half of the time it's me. Nobody else is around me telling me you're not good enough or you're not worthy. Nobody has ever articulated that. But because it's the belief,
it's a belief.
I try and challenge it. So I often ask myself things like, where is the evidence that you're using to suggest that you're not good enough? You've actually been interviewed and they've given you a job. So you've actually got evidence that contrary to your belief.
At this time, are you saying this aloud, or it's just...
Oh, yeah, I'm being known to say this aloud to myself, because sometimes they're so bad that I have to kind of come out of my head and go, what the hell, what are you thinking? And really dissect those thoughts to actually look for the evidence. What evidence are you using to suggest that you're not good enough? And often, more than not, I don't have the evidence. It's just a belief that I have that is based on past experiences that people have said that has no basis to now.
But now, knowing this, what you know now, and at 19, when you came over into the diaspora, how difficult was it to navigate?
It was difficult to navigate coming to the diaspora. It was difficult to navigate. It was difficult to navigate. Who we are is determined, by our surroundings, by the people that surround us. When you're 19 years old and you're living everything that you know, your comfort of your home, and you're going to the diaspora and you're starting afresh, it's difficult. You have to make new friends. You have to, understand the language. I understood English.
Yeah.
But I had to understand the language, if you know what I mean, when I came to Sunderland, because there's a very broad accent, different dialect, and wanting to fit in, and really struggling with that, because I couldn't. In 2001, when I came, you would count how many black people were in Sunderland in the street. Count on one hand. And we all knew each other, by the way. So you can imagine how difficult that is. And being black in Sunderland was, I would say, reinforced some of those negative beliefs that I had probably from being a child. Because when I came to Sunderland, it was very difficult in terms of acceptance, being a black person, working with white people. It was hard. And some of my traumatic memories are from then, when I first came. You know, I remember working for a very famous, I will not name names.
Absolutely fine.
You know, dental practice in Sunderland, and you living, you know, you have coat hangers, and when you leave your jackets in the morning, I would put my jacket on the coat hanger where everybody else's was, and I would walk past and somebody would be spraying air freshener on my jacket, and you think, what the hell? You know, moments like that, really feeling quite difficult and really distraught, and really done by, because people didn't know that, you know, that would hurt. But again, moving past that, and just, you know, when you've got when you have a conviction and a belief that you can do it, you know, I didn't allow those moments to define who I was as a person and as a black woman.
I was talking to somebody last week, and they were mentioning that it's those moments that kind of like mold your character for success. Would you say that the fact that we know there is a level of inequality in terms of racism and everything else, those are the things that have kind of like gave you that springboard, you know, to excel even more?
I would say so, because every opportunity that has been thrown in my face, or where there's been discrimination or you know, inequality, I've wanted to prove people wrong.
All right.
That actually, no, you know, I can do it. And my statement is, I can do it through Christ who strengthens me. Wow. Because our place in society is not determined by man. It's determined by God. So one can come and be really brutal and racist towards me and really put me down, but I'm a child of God. And he strengthens me all the time. So every opportunity that has been thrown in my face, I've surpassed it because of my conviction in God and Christ, and knowing that, you know, my mom ever saying, you know, God makes no riffraff, you know. He makes no riffraff. So if you don't make no riffraff, no way am I gonna make another human determine that and make me feel inadequate or inferior. Wow,
that's powerful. It's powerful. So, all right, you grew up from a Christian family, but at what point do you take possession of your faith? At what point do you start saying, you know what, I need to build that relationship with my Maker, rather than, you know, let's go to church? I still force my children to go to church. Some of them don't want to go. But at what point do you actually arrive to say, okay, now I can communicate with God himself by myself and have a proper relationship?
My encounter came at 14.
At 14?
Yeah.
Wow. Could you share with us a little on that?
I was at boarding school actually. And yeah, up until that time, I was being forced to go to church. Okay. Every Sunday, and I'll tell a joke, and potentially my mom will see this and she'll laugh. But yeah, there were times when I'll be like, I don't want to go to church on a Sunday, and I'll because we wore grey, as youths in Salvation, we wore grey. I'll go get butter from the kitchen and iron it on my skirt.
Oh, just to avoid
to avoid going to church, and I'll put butter because it was too dirty. She'd be like, oh, you can't go because your skirt is is gone.
Yeah.
But at the age of 14, I had my first encounter with God and hearing His voice for the first time and really actually listening to what God had to say. And it was a boarding school in a big dormitory full of people, and had a conversation and personal relationship with God. And on the Sunday, because we used to have a service on a Sunday at boarding school. The school I went to was non-denominational, so anybody could come in and give us word. And I remember one of the Saturdays, there was a preacher, I think, from actually the street I grew up in. His name is Ephraim, and he lived up the road from where I grew up. And he had come to the school for some word. And the night before, I had this encounter with God, and I remember actually having the word on the Saturday and giving my life to Christ then at the age of 14.
Wow.
Because the conviction was there. It was there that this is what was meant to be. And I've never looked back ever since, and praise God all the time.
All right. Yeah. So how then can you help people who are struggling, or even to know that, well, actually, I hear this voice, but I don't know whether it's God or, I'm obviously as a therapist, there are a lot of things that go. So how can you help somebody navigate that path?
I always say, with beliefs and religion, it's not a forced matter. Mm-hmm. And sometimes as parents we feel guilty for, have I done the right thing? But the Bible does say, teach the child in the way they ought to go and they will not depart too far from it. Okay. So my parents did what they needed to do. They set me on the right path. My encounter with God happened without them being there. Yeah. And it was a personal relationship with God that then catapulted me into doing the things that, going that path. Okay. But they set me up on the right way. So I think sometimes, particularly for younger people, or even older people, you might be hearing that voice that, speaks to you and you think, oh, I'm not going to listen to that. Mm. But, like the encounter I had, I prayed about that voice that I used to hear. And I said, well, show me who you are. Speak to me and I want to see you. And my prayer was, open the eyes of my heart. Because I really wanted to see God and I really wanted to feel Him. I didn't want to hear it from somebody else. Yeah. Because people were telling me about these encounters. I was like,
why is it not happening?
Why is it not happening to me? And I used to ask those questions. And when I started praying about it and I had the personal encounter. So my advice is just, if you're hearing things and you're hearing the word of God or a voice that's speaking to you, pray about it and ask Him to reveal Himself and tell you now. You won't be surprised.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we've moved all the way. We're now in Sunderland and we've gone through all those challenges. Yeah. What I still I'm trying to understand is, when you came in, you did accounting. What was that about?
Well, you remember when I was telling you that I was trying to figure out who I was. I didn't like maths, but I liked accounts at school. So when I was doing a bit of research, because obviously in Zimbabwe, yes, I was 19, but in terms of kind of doing the overall research of what careers were in Zimbabwe, my options were limited because, like yourself, I wasn't the cream of the crop, I had to do things that were within my skill set. So when I came here, when I was doing the research, I found this accounting program that I thought, I might do. It was a 2-year program. I thought I'll do that and then I can go into accounts because I could see myself being an accountant. But also going back to, sometimes in our African communities, there's some careers that, are default. You're cream of the crop if you tell people and they ask you questions. If they ask you questions, what do you want to do when you grow up? It's either accounting, doctor, lawyer, things like that. So these were some things that I thought, if I were an accountant, then I'll be successful. Because I couldn't be a doctor, I couldn't be anything else because I didn't have that educational attainment. So accounting was the next best thing. So when I came, that was the initial plan for me to go into accounting.
Okay.
But that path changed, and I found myself went the opposite direction.
Going the opposite direction. Yeah, it's interesting. You mention what our expectations are within our own communities, like when it comes to how children should go in terms of career paths. You know, being a doctor, being all these different things, but and all those require a certain level of academic, attainment. Not being the cream of the crop, not pursuing the academic route. What options? Obviously, in Zim, there were not so many, but when coming here, you realize, oh, actually, there are different gifts that people have been given. It could be tennis, it could be in football. But in Zim, we wouldn't recognize that. It could be music, it could be all these different things. So, I mean, how would you help our, ethnic minority communities to have that understanding? That, it's not only academia that's more important, but it's actually the gift that one actually has, which can be pursued.
Yeah. I think you raise a very valid question in terms of how can we support, in terms of our culture and stuff like that. And one of the things that I always strive to do is educate people about the impact of forcing and pushing children into career paths that they don't want because they're doing it for you. They're not doing it for themselves. And we see a lot of issues with mental health, issues with depression, anxiety, because children are shoehorned into a career path based on us as parents, what we want to be telling our friends when we meet them. Oh, he's a doctor. Oh, he's a, rather than actually seeing your child and actually seeing what they are good at and trying to support them in the career path they've chosen. So I think for me, in terms of kind of thinking about being a parent from a parent perspective, I think your child will tell you what they want. You already know what your child wants from being a young age. For example, I've got 2 children. Yeah. I already know, like, my daughter is more academic, my son is more sporty. You can see the difference.
Yeah.
In what they spend their time doing. My son can spend hours and hours outside playing football. Okay. My daughter wouldn't be seen outside. She doesn't like it because that's not true. But you'll see her in front of a book. She can read 4 hours on end. So I think children can tell you and show you the path they want to take. And I think sometimes as parents, it's very important that we recognize that and ask questions. What would you like to do? Who would you like to be? Because they will tell you. And not to laugh when they say those things. Because they might come up with career paths that you've never imagined. Nowadays there's, you can actually have a career as a YouTuber.
Yes. And
an influencer. All those are careers that can make people money, but sometimes with you need to be a doctor, you need to be a nurse, you need to be we can actually shoehorn children into career paths that they don't like, rather than actually encouraging them and finding out more, doing a bit of research about what they're saying, and really supporting them in those paths.
Okay. No, thank you very much. Thank you for that. So, as a social worker, you obviously finished uni. How was the acceptance in the communities that you're serving?
I think it was mixed. When you help someone, you get a different reception than when you work with somebody.
Okay.
When you work with somebody, you're a peer. You're working with your peers.
Yeah.
And I used to find it was my peers that were less accepting than the people I was helping.
Why is that?
I don't know. I don't know why that was. Because I guess when you're helping somebody, there's a level of gratitude and acceptance that comes with that, because you're not there to judge them, or you're there to help them. So I found that I got more acceptance from clients when I started out my career.
Okay.
And then over time, I found that I get more. I'm accepted now. I don't know what it is that I am part of the team wherever I work. I don't seem to have that many problems with racism or injustice. I am very much accepted and become part of the team. And I don't know whether it comes from the fact that I now understand the culture. I can really, I've made many amazing friends in both my careers and everything. So I think as I've progressed through my career, I found that, the acceptance has changed. So I very rarely feel like I'm not part of a team. Very rarely.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Tell us about your first promotion.
Wow.
How was that?
That was amazing. So I was working in a service in Durham. Had worked there for a long time. And interesting, I never really felt part of a team there. I just used to come and do my job and go home and not really interact. I had friends, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't really deep friendships in some respects. But in other respects, I had really, really good friends that I went to uni with. So it was a mixed bag, if I may say so myself. So I was working in that service and then had just had my son and decided I was going to work half days, 30 hours a week. And then while working 30 hours a week, I found another role in a health psychology department. And I thought, I fancied that. I wanted to split my days and become, work more around the health related presentation. So I went to work in a hospital in North Tyneside. So I was doing some hours there and then some hours in Durham. And then decided to pack it in all together, working in Durham, and to go for an agency. I decided to pack the full-time job.
So what influenced that?
I think I just had enough. I'd had enough of working in a service where, where I felt undervalued and undermined and not really valued that much. So I thought, I'm just going to work in an agency. So I left, started working for an agency. Okay. I ended up in a service in Northumberland and worked there for, I would say, 6 months, just as an agency worker, while still working in the hospital in that Tyneside. So I'll do a couple of hours in Northumberland. And my manager then, a vacancy came up. And he said, well, why didn't you apply for it? And I looked at him and I thought, me? You want me to apply for that job? He says, yeah, why not? I was like, you want me to be a manager? He's like, yeah, why not? For the first time, somebody else had seen in me what I didn't see in myself. So I applied for the job and I got the job as one of their managers to manage a team up in the west of Northumberland. So I took on that job and if we think about imposter syndrome, you can imagine getting a job where you don't believe you should be getting the job in the first place and where you don't believe you deserve the job because you doubt yourself. I struggled the first few months where the transition was hard in terms of challenging my own mindset because somebody else had seen potential in me and I didn't see it. The good thing is I felt supported. The team around me was very supportive. I was really supported in that role. There wasn't this hoarding of information. I was just really supported by the management team and I flourished in that role. And yeah, that was my first promotion.
Wow. So in terms of imposter syndrome, why do we seem to kind of like struggle, not realizing what we're capable of doing?
For me, I think it goes back to words from other people, words that people have spoken, and that I have taken that I have believed. experiences that I've gone through that I have then used as a benchmark to measure my value as a person. Yeah, that's where it comes from.
So now it's interesting you mentioned value. How do you measure your value now?
I don't measure my value based on how somebody else sees me anymore. I measure my value on how I see myself.
How do you see this?
I see myself as a blessed, beautiful, confident Black woman.
Wow. Now that's very impressive. And you know, the thing is, when I'm doing this conversation with people, it actually is building me up as an individual as well. One of my friends asked me at one particular point in time to say, okay, so what is it exactly that you are gaining from talking to people? And it's not realizing that all the time when I talk to somebody, there's something that I learn from them. And it's actually building my confidence. It's actually giving me a better insight into who I am and who I could possibly become.
Yeah.
But no, that's very insightful. Let's find a better word. No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So obviously we've been talking about the issues that would happen in terms of inequality, in terms of transitions and everything else. So you find yourself transitioning from just an ordinary social worker and going more into the in-depth work. At what point do those things kind of change?
I think, in terms of my career, do you mean?
Yeah, in terms of
where
career.
I've changed from being a social worker novice into more therapy-based stuff.
Yeah.
I think for me it was when during the work that I was doing, just having that itch to try and find something else. I also think part of my personality is that I'm always thinking, I'm always researching, I'm always thinking about what next. In terms of who I am as a person, I think it's just intrinsic. It's internal. It's in me.
Yeah.
I get bored easily in terms of just sitting there and doing the mundane stuff that So that I think the career that I've chosen has landed itself very well in the fact that I have to do a lot of reading. I have to do a lot of research. No client is the same. So although I've gone to uni and I've studied how to treat depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress disorder, no patient is the same. So I'm often left with having to research a lot. So I think for me, the transition came through that same process where I was thinking, I've got this client, but then I had the same client last time who had this presentation, but they're different. Why is that? And then I started thinking about, it looks like the way we think about ourselves as well can have an influence on how we do things. Okay. That's why I ended up going more depth into therapy.
So a question arises in my mind about fixed mindset and growth mindset. Mm-hmm. That concept. So what is your understanding of that? And where do you think you fall between the two?
If I look at myself right now,
yeah,
and where I've come from, I would like to believe I've got a growth mindset.
Okay.
The reason why I say that is, I don't think I know everything. I feel people have built, I listen. When people are talking, I like to listen and listen to what they're saying and listen really good and take nuggets of wisdom from other people. And I use that information to grow myself as a person. So from where I was to where I am right now, I would like to believe I've got a growth mindset because every opportunity that I've had, I haven't stayed in the same. The reason why I say that, if I didn't have a growth mindset, I would still be the 19-year-old who came from Zimbabwe and stayed in that mindset of I'm just a girl from Zimbabwe.
So do you think a fixed mindset and growth mindset, one can transition from that to that, or it cannot change.
I think we can all learn new skills. I think if you have what we perceive to be a fixed mindset, and you have blinkers, the way I see it is blinkers, and you're just fixed on one thing and you're not looking elsewhere, you have to stop yourself and think, is this the direction that I want to take? And if it is, that's okay. But it means that you're going to just continue propelling or going the direction that you set your mind to. But I find if you allow yourself to pause and stop and actually ask yourself, where am I going? Is this the direction I'm going to take? Is it the right direction? Is there anyone else with the wisdom that can give me a different set of direction? Then you forever have a big fixed mindset. So to answer your question, I think you can change if you want to change. But if you're fixed and you think this is who I am and I don't want to change who I am, then fixed mindsets can stay fixed without change.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I always say, and it kind of like brought, it opened my eyes basically when I read about Jesus grew in stature and in wisdom. So it means with physical growth, there needs to be an equal growth in mindset and everything else. So it becomes transitional.
But sometimes you find that our belief system, the way we've been raised, how we've grown up, can influence that mindset significantly. You can grow in stature, but not in wisdom.
Not in wisdom.
Yeah.
That is very true.
Yeah.
It's very true. No, thank you. I'll be forever thanking you.
Well, I should thank you. It's not all of the time where you get the opportunity to reflect on your life and what you've done. And I honestly don't think when you say, or when you called me, you said, well, I would like, you've reached 40 and I would like to do a bit of, about your successes. I was like, what successes are you talking about?
You see, this is the thing. At the end of every conversation, not that I'm ending this one, but at the end of every conversation, I would like people to reflect and say, okay, my question to you would be, do you consider yourself a success? At the beginning and at the end. So if one does not consider themselves a success, we walk through that journey. And then at the end they should say, oh yes, actually, the milestones that I've hit in my lifetime, it is success in its own right. So we are all successful in our own right. It's not easy transitioning from a 19-year-old, moving from home, going to boarding school, gaining qualifications and everything. Those are milestones that we all achieve. Getting a driver's license, your first car, your first promotion, Yeah. So then, you walk through that journey, you realize, no, it doesn't take Elon Musk to be interviewed to show me success. No. Because success is what I define as success.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Because sometimes the level of success is determined by what we see, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
We think it's determined by money as well, but maybe not.
Yeah, but obviously the money comes by transforming the belief systems. Because what I believed then and what I believe now, people think I'm a bit crazy when I do these things, but it has to do with what's going on in me, but it just didn't start there. It's taken a long time to get to that point.
Yeah.
So we are still in that process of becoming better at every time. So when I read that statement to say Jesus grew in stature and in wisdom, I thought, oh, okay. So it's actually meant for me to grow as an individual.
Yeah, we're forever changing.
Yeah.
And I'm a strong believer in that. I need to be a better version of myself tomorrow than I am today. So every day is an opportunity to grow and learn. And that's what I always strive for. So I do not discriminate who I'm learning from, because sometimes we underestimate who is around us that can teach us. But I'm a very strong believer that anybody can teach you a lesson. Even a 2-year-old can teach you a lesson. Even a 70-year-old can teach you a lesson. So I'm constantly ever evolving, ever changing, listening to those nuggets of wisdom that people can bring. And I find that it's really helped me throughout my journey to where I am right now. And I'm a believer that God is not finished yet.
Oh yes, definitely not. Definitely not. As we sit in your beautiful home, thank you for inviting me into it anyways. But there's obviously there are ups and downs to every story. One of the changing parts to your life was when Dad passed on. I can relate because I lost my dad, at a tender age as well. But I watched you. At the time, you had an assignment that you had to submit. And while everybody gathered, you were still working on that assignment. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So to me, a situation like that happening, it means I put all tools down and focus on my loss. Can you just walk me through what's actually going on in your mind at that point?
So one of the things that for me being a therapist, I understand how easy how that can be easily done. Because the grief cycle strikes at different parts in people's lives. When you lose something so dear to you, I and my dad were very close to each other, and I lost something very dear to me. But I also think the fact that I was the firstborn, the fact that I had other responsibilities, didn't lend itself very well in me starting the grieving process when everybody else did. Okay. So I find that my grief process started later on, after everybody else had, where they'd already processed their emotions and feelings about what happened. I found myself grieving later on. And it was really hard. It was really hard when it started. And I think my understanding of that now, with being a therapist, is that, some people, when somebody passes away, some people have already started grieving, depending on the journey that you go through. Okay. If somebody dies suddenly, you're always grieving from that point.
From that point, yeah.
But my dad collapsed a week before he passed away.
Yeah.
So some people, I can't say everybody started the grieving process then. Yeah. I think our ability to deal with what was happening was very different at different stages for my family, from my mom, my brother, my sister. And then having to feel like I needed to be strong for everybody else because the funeral needed to be planned and I needed to be there. I couldn't fall apart, because if I fell apart, then nobody could fix what was going on. So in those terms, we call that complicated grief, when you don't have the opportunity to actually grieve at the same time that everybody else, because there's other things that are going on. They take more priority at that time than the grieving process. So okay. I was I was actually in the middle of a course. Yeah. In the course that interpersonal psychotherapy. Hello, my name is Ncube. I'm the director of Open Mind Psychological Therapy Service, a service that delivers psychological interventions to common mental health problems, including depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and OCD. I offer nice recommended treatments to adults from the age of 16, or children and adults who suffer from common mental health problems. I deliver sessions via telephone, video, or via text-based services. Get in contact if you are struggling with your mental health at the moment and you want support using the approach cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a nice recommended intervention for most anxiety and depressive disorders. I'm also qualified in interpersonal psychotherapy, which is a therapy based on the understanding that depression can be attributed or caused by difficulties happening interpersonally. I also work with clients who are experiencing grief. So if you feel you need somebody to talk to, please contact me on 0777 27 52510. Having to write the assignment and complete that, and that whole year, having to do the work. Only to realize when I picked up a client during my course, who was grieving the loss of her father as well.
Okay.
And I remember going into the sessions and thinking, yeah, I'm helping you process the loss of your dad, but actually I haven't processed mine. And it really hitting me hard. And being brave in the whole entire session for an hour, and leaving the room and breaking down after my client had left.
Okay.
And my colleagues having to pick me up off the floor because it was so bad. But it happened later on. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when people are grieving, or when you see people grieving a certain type of way, it doesn't mean they're not grieving. It probably is delayed grief reaction, or delayed grieving, because I certainly think my grief process started way later, and it lasted way longer than it should have, because I think I went through the 7 cycles of grief. I went through them later on.
But how did you manage to separate? If you're walking into your room with a client and you manage to step out of your own kind of like situation and focus on their own.
But that's what we do as therapists. That's what you do on a day-to-day basis. You turn up for your client, because they're the ones that have come to you for that support that you need. So therapists are human beings.
Yeah.
We might be having everything going on at home. Illness, you've left your children unwell, you've left, you probably have an argument with your husband. But when you walk into that room, it's not about you. It's about that client. So because I've been a therapist for a long time, I'm able to recognize that this is the client's time and they need that. And really turn up for them and give them that support that they need. But obviously, being human, coming away from having had an hour session with somebody and breaking down and needing somebody else to pick me up. That's the nature of what I was doing at that time.
Of the job.
Of the job, yeah.
No, thank you. And in terms of our own community, ethnic minority, I mean, say, what do you think are the challenges that you're facing in terms of mental health? In terms of, are we coming up for therapy? Are we engaging at all?
No. And I think if you've heard me speak at some occasions in the past, I have said this over and over again. I've been a therapist, I'm coming up 12 years now.
Wow.
I've only ever treated 2 black people.
Really?
Yeah.
So what do you think is the challenge with that?
I think there's a lot of stigma with mental health and mental ill health that plagues our community, both from a Christian perspective and religious perspective, where I've heard people say they need demons exorcised out of them, and it pains me to hear people say that, because mental health is just like a broken leg. You never hear people say, let's exorcise the demon that's broken somebody's leg. The brain is a physical, is an organ that can break, just like a leg can break. And I think the stigma that's associated in our society about mental health, and the fear that comes from, if I tell people what's actually going on, they're going to judge me. It's really sad, because I think that is what plagues our community. I don't know if you're into statistics, but, we are more likely to suffer from, significant mental health problems than the general population. Depression, anxiety are common. That's why they're called common mental health problems. They are very common. 1 in 5 people will experience depression and anxiety.
Okay.
But we don't talk about it. even more so in our men, in our black men. You know, a lot of them are not getting, they struggle with the society, getting the jobs that they trained to do, or they'll go into a job that, they're undermined, and they end up coming home feeling quite low and depressed, all those things, but no outlet, no one to talk to about them, and just bottling them in, because of fear that if I talk about it, I'm going to be judged negatively. I even go back, Mr. Flaba, to how we raised our boy children. Okay. I've had parents go, "Boys don't cry," to their boys children. What are we saying? What are we saying when we're saying boys don't cry? We're saying you need to always be strong and you can't break down. But when they start breaking down, they're breaking down at an old age. And we were telling them to be strong. We're telling them not to cry because they're boys. What does that say?
Yeah, true.
You were raising children to be boys, to be strong and not to show signs of weakness. And then when they're older, we wonder why they're struggling. So I think fundamentally there's a real big change that needs to happen to recognize that mental health is real.
Yeah, I can relate. So where do you think we need to start with this?
Conversations, seminars, invite people that know about the subject, hear what they have to say, set up men groups, set up parent groups, and talk about these things without fear of judgment or without fear of judgment.
Would you be willing to come and sit and
I have spoken in many places. Yes, I would.
Yeah.
Because I think that's where it starts. Okay. Even going to I don't know if you saw this article about black man who's killed himself in a mental health hospital. This ligature with his belt goes back to the fact that he didn't feel the need to talk to anybody.
And where is that?
A Zimbabwean guy. He came last year from Zimbabwe. And I think when I heard it, it really pained me because I think it's happening here. It's happening locally. The amount of black men dying by suicide is high. And it starts from us talking about it, our community. What are the problems? Are boys, men, women able to talk about how they're feeling, what's breaking them? And I don't think that we can.
And that's food for thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for enlightening us and giving us the statistics and the professional side. Yeah, a few days ago, or rather when I spoke to you, I was actually thinking afterwards that, well, how would it be if we went a bit professional and addressed some of the issues that you've actually addressed now? And I was saying, well, maybe not, but yeah, it tends to work out.
Mm.
But thank you very much. Yeah. Definitely. Anyway, we've spoken quite a lot, and you've elaborated on a few issues. So back to you. Where do you think Mavreen is going in the future?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Where am I going? Well, I would start by saying, at the moment, I feel blessed and honored to be doing what I'm doing right now. And to be in the position that I am, because I never dreamed that I'll be where I am in the first place. So the fact that I got to this point is actually a blessing on its own. Right now, I'm just thinking about, how to make myself, how to improve myself and how to support the people that I support. Be it my staff, be it the clients that we work with, and just making sure that we've got the service that everybody would thrive for. That's in my career. As a wife, I'm always forever thriving to be the best that I can, supporting my family. As a mother, raising my children to be, functional adults who know and fear God. As a daughter, being the best daughter that I can. As a sister, being a sister that I can. Yeah, and just exercising gratitude in this moment. And in terms of where I'm going, I think God has more in store for me. Don't know what that is yet. Yeah.
Is that in ministry or
everywhere?
Do you feel your job is a ministry in itself, or you need to be a pastor or a minister, evangelist?
I think my job is a ministry on its own.
Okay.
And the first thing I do every time I get a new client is I say to God, you know your child more than I do. Give me the wisdom to work with them. Because no book, I'm a strong believer that no book that I sit or read is ever going to know that person deeply than the Maker himself. You might say that's too religious for a therapist, but those are the beliefs that I have that have supported me in my career. And I've worked with individuals that, I've seen thrive and flourish. I've read books. I will continue to read books, so I'll be directed to a book that I need to read in order to support that individual. But I'm always praying that give me the wisdom to do your job, to do your work in this person. So for me, I think it's a ministry by itself.
Yeah, true. I tend to try and separate as much as I can, obviously knowing that not everyone is religious and not everyone is a believer.
Yeah.
But I wanted to lean on the side of, I won't be dwelling much on the spiritual side. But the more I do that, I find myself, unfortunately, coming back to that point where I've come up with a principle to say, I think you've heard me speak about it, that human beings are spiritually 80% and physically 20%. So it's very hard to separate the two. So yeah, I totally agree that wherever we are, it's ministry. I don't have to Bible bash somebody.
No.
But it's the concepts, it's the principles, the foundational pieces that every human being has to understand, that there's something else beyond them. And coming to that understanding, even as we're speaking now, it's a spiritual process.
Yeah.
The emotions that people go through, it's a spiritual process. So it's understanding that those things need to be linked to a higher power than just yourself. And then it helps you understand, the individual.
That's it in front of you,
yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I am a Christian, but you're right. In my practice, I do not impose that perspective or that religion on anybody, because I think that would be very unfair for me to do that. But when I go back to who I am and what defines me and how I've got to this point, it would be a travesty if I don't say what it is and who I am, because then I am hiding that piece of me that is important. And when I reflect on who I am, that is who I am. I don't impose it on anybody else. I don't want anybody to be me, but when I reflect on the journey and what I've got to and where I'm going, I'm forever humbled and forever grateful that I am where I am. And it's through the grace of God, I think.
Wow, that's wonderful. No, thank you very much. As a final note, because I know I would have question after question, but I know we'll come back in future to celebrate your success. But that'll be another milestone. But before I go, tell me, you are into management. How big is your team? That's just for me.
Maybe about 86.
Wow. That's just to give me something to emulate.
But in terms of the team itself, so just to give you a bit of context, so I manage a service with about 86 staff. Not, and when I say manage, it's not operational management. I clinically lead a service of 86. So
what's the difference?
So I'm more clinical elements, so clinical aspects of the role. So organizing supervision, making sure that the service is running as efficient as possible, and making sure that every clinician that we've got is qualified and they're doing what they're meant to. So instead of being a therapist myself, I no longer do therapy, individual therapy. I do see 1 or 2 clients here and there to pick my practice, but I'm more on the side of leading the team in terms of clinical governance of the service, making sure that the governance is the service is governed appropriately. I've got a counterpart who's the operational side. So in our service, there's 2 of us. One is the operational side of the service, and I'm the clinical side of the service, and we sit on the same level, but we manage 2 different aspects, if that makes sense. So there is 86 people in the service that we both I clinically manage and she operationally manages.
Wow. No, that's quite impressive. And I mean, you recently turned 40. Sorry for mentioning that, saying that out loud, but you've crossed over to
the fourth floor.
The wiser ones. But you have reached. I would say not the pinnacle, but you're somewhere there.
Milestone.
Yeah, definitely it's an achievement, and you've done very well.
Thank you.
We can only wish you all the best in the future. But as a final note, I would like to just ask you to say, what advice would you give the audience, or if maybe you want to focus on young people or ethnic minorities, what kind of advice would you give at a personal level and at a professional level to the audience?
I always say I've got different advice for different occasions, but just to sum up, from a perspective of being a black woman living in the Northeast, it's easy to buckle down and be defeated and have a defeatist mindset of, it's not working. But I'm a strong believer that you need to be the change that you want to see.
Wow, you need to be the change that you want to see. It's powerful.
Because I think a lot of us will go through life saying, this is not changing, that's not changing, but we don't want to do anything about it. So I think the first thing is be the change that you want to see. Goes back from, there's so many places that we are needed, our voice is needed, that you don't find it. School governors, counselors, things like that, where our voice is needed to be able to change the futures of our generations. But where there's no money, we don't tend to be seen. And I think we need to be the change that we want to see. Sometimes it's not always about money. It's about, what do you want to see? What's the change? If you want to see the school system functioning differently, what are you doing about it? If you want to see the health system change, what are you doing about it? So I go back to my point, be the change that you want to see as a black person.
Wow.
And from a young person's point of view, You might think you know everything right now, but you don't. And I think, for me, listening to those that have gone before me has been helpful, because you kind of avoid the pitfalls that you're going to make. Why do you want to make a pitfall when somebody's already made them
for you? Yeah, definitely.
You can learn from those mistakes. And I find that, I've been young myself, where you think, oh, what do they know? They are all these people, but all the people have got wisdom and guidance that, will avoid so many heartbreak and headaches for you if you listen. So I think anyone who takes the time to give you advice, listen to what they're saying. Because only people that care about you and love you will give you time. Give you the time and day to sit down and actually say, "That's what you need to do."
No, thank you.
Professional wise, I think always remember that you can do it. Whatever you set your mind to it, you can do it. Just have to have the confidence, the grace, and the understanding that your time will come.
Wow. I could sit here all day and listen to you. Oh, no, thank you.
You can listen to me all day. I mean, I don't mind.
I think it's only fair that I'll let you go. On a final note, what would you say, what kind of advice would you give me as an individual who's starting out on this project? What insights, what would you say?
Believe in yourself. That's what I would say.
Is that all?
Believe in yourself. You know what that means. Yeah. Doubting Thomas needs to come out of your head.
Thank you very much.
You need to believe in yourself, because I think we don't have many people doing what you're doing. So when I go back to the concept, be the change that you want to see. You are the change that you want to see. Because there aren't many people recognizing talent in Black people.
Really?
Where have you seen videos of us acknowledging each other and what the successes that we've done?
I've never actually looked at it that way.
Not many. Particularly in our community, particularly in the Northeast. I don't know elsewhere, but yeah.
No, thank you very much. And on a final note, it's a tradition that I borrowed from a friend of mine who says he sits in his own house and he toasts to himself.
Wow.
To say, they might not say much about you, but well done you. So I would like us just to pick up our glasses and celebrate the milestones that you've achieved, Mavrin Ncube. I rarely call you by name, but you've done very well.
Thank you.
And we wish you many more years. Hopefully someday we'll be coming back to celebrate more achievements.
Thank you.
And enjoy your holiday.
I shall. Thank you. I'll do it. Yes to me.